In the next few videos, we are going to be talking about layouts in Automatic CSS, how you lay out and structure content on a page. We have grid layouts, auto grids, variable grids, content grids, flex layouts. We have a lot of different layout options. We're not going to tackle them all in a single video, so we are going to spread these out over the course of a few videos, starting with this one, which is going to cover traditional grid layouts. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We are starting with a blank slate. Now, I am going to build something so that you can see this in some sort of practical application. But where we are going to start is just by creating somewhat of a grid playground. And I actually would encourage you to follow along with exactly what I'm doing right here so that you can practice and you can familiarize yourself with how these different controls work. It is a prerequisite to know a little bit about CSS Grid. I'm going to link to a video down below from my Page Building 101 course where I went over CSS Grid. I will also link to a video on grid versus flexbox so that you can understand when should I use grid, when should I use flex. Primarily for layouts, you're going to be using grid. But that's neither here nor there. Let's go ahead and get into the actual details. So I'm going to take this inner container. This is going to be our playground. The first thing I want to do, and I'm going to right click our classes input up here, which means I'm going to be using utility classes for this exploration that we're doing. First thing I want to do is I want to make this height bigger so that I have a lot more room to work with. So I'm going to type in height, and then you can choose whatever you want, 70, 80, 90. I'm just going to go with 80. And what that's going to do is apply the height 80 utility class, and it's going to give me 80 VH in height, in minimum height. Okay. All right. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a box, a div inside of this box. So I'm going to hit plus sign. I'm going to add a div. And that's going to put a div inside. Now, I want that div to have a little bit of size. So I'm not going to use height or width. I'm just going to use padding. Padding is going to inherently give this box some sort of size without directly trying to control its size, because you're going to see in a minute, the grid actually has the ability to control the size of the element. So I'm just going to hit pad, and I am just going to throw padding M or padding L. It doesn't really matter which one I choose. And then I am going to put BG, and I'm going to make this a primary colored box. Okay, so I have padding L and I have BG primary. Another thing that I should note before we continue any further is in the Automatic CSS dashboard, when you go into options and utility classes, you're going to want to make sure these utility classes that we're using are actually turned on. Otherwise, they're not going to do anything. So for example, you can turn off the padding classes. You can turn off the grid classes. You can turn off flexbox classes. We need to make sure that they are on for the purposes of this training and these tutorials that we're doing. Okay, so make sure all of those are on in options. Okay, so I have a red box that I can now position inside of my playground. I need to turn my playground into a grid. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to right click, I'm going to type the word grid, and you are going to see lots and lots and lots of different options because grid is a very extensive system. Now, we are going to live a lot in this columns area here. This is going to be a main area that you live in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a 6-column grid. We have support up to 12 columns in utility classes, but I'm just going to go with a 6-column grid. And if you notice, my box is changing. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that we are seeing Bricks has like a overlay feature for grids that actually shows you the underlying grid structure. Automatic CSS gives you the ability to turn this on and off. Under Bricks enhancements, you can see Bricks Grid Visualizer. I have it turned off. You can make sure that it's turned on. Now, I actually don't like the visualizer for most of the work that I do, but for a tutorial like this, the visualizer would be very helpful to have because now, as you can see, it's showing me with outlines the actual structure of my grid. Automatic CSS, again, gives you the ability to turn that on or off. And this was just a helpful time to show you that that option exists and what this visualizer actually does. Okay. The next thing we're going to do, I have 6 columns. I want to have 6 rows also in my playground. So I'm going to right click, hit grid. Now, Columns, you're going to see right off the bat, you're not really going to see anything about rows. Why is that? Because rows, defining, explicitly setting a number of rows, is something that you would rarely do. It is possible in automatic CSS, but you would rarely do it. So the controls aren't right at the top. If we scroll down, we will find rows down here, and I can say grid rows 6. And when I put that on, it's going to add the utility class grid rows 6. And now you can see my playground grid structure has changed. Notice that this box is not filling the entire cell because a grid implicitly has, or explicitly in this case, because I've defined them, has cell sizes. And your object in here might conform width-wise to the cell size, but maybe not height-wise to the cell size. There's a concept in grid called stretch. And so if we just type the word stretch, which is a utility class in automatic CSS, you're going to notice that our block, right, stretches to fill its entire cell. There's actually a few different ways to do that, but stretch is a very easy one. Stretch is also going to give you equal height columns. So in different layouts where you want the columns to be equal height and follow each other, right, not rely on the height of the content, but be the same height as each other, stretch is a really good way to do that. Stretch gives you equal height columns. There's something else that will make these rows all the exact same height, which again, you might not use this very often, but for our playground is helpful, and it's called grid auto rows, okay? And so I'm gonna click that, and we're gonna add that utility class to our grid as well, grid auto rows. Now at this point, my playground is essentially set up. Now what I wanna do is on my section, I wanna do BG, I'm gonna choose light, and then on my playground, I'm gonna do BG, and I'm gonna choose white, and that's just gonna make my playground easier to see. Okay, I'm also going to duplicate this div, and for this one, we're going to take off BG primary, and we are going to do BG primary dark. So I have two different colored objects, okay? And now I am free to start playing within my playground. And as you can see, we are doing this all with utility classes in automatic CSS. It's going to show you the power of the utility class system. This is not to say that this is the only way to manage grids in automatic CSS. And it's not to say that this is even the best way to manage grids in automatic CSS. Sometimes the utility classes are really good to use, a really good approach, and sometimes you want to use custom classes and grid variables, which we're also going to talk about later on in this video. And we'll also talk about the discussion of when do you BIM and when do you use utility classes when you are building grids and grid layouts, okay? Great, fantastic. Now, let's go ahead. I've selected my box. I'm going to right click and type grid. And you are going to see, if I scroll down a little bit, I have some controls for how this particular box behaves. I have starts, I have ends, I have spans, if I search for the word span. It also should be noted that some of these controls, and this is just the nature of CSS, overlap with flex. So some flexbox controls actually work in CSS grid. So you're going to want to make sure you have both of those turned on if you're going to be heavily using utility classes like this. But we're going to first explore start and end because I think these are very, very easy to understand for the most part. So I'm going to take this box right here, the dark one. Let's take the dark one. And let's say I want to choose for that box to start in column 3. Right now it's sitting by default in column 2, but I want it to start in column 3. So I'm going to type grid and I'm going to come down here to column start and I'm going to hover. Notice the hover styling is really, really, really helpful here because I can see what the utility is going to do before I add it. But I can say, all right, I want this to start in column 3, and then I want it to end in column 5. So if I hover over 5 and I choose it, and notice that they're highlighted to let you know that you applied them. You can also drag this down so you can actually see the classes better. You can actually put this over here if you want to, put it wherever you want, but it's also giving you a visual indication that you have added these classes by highlighting them for you in the context menu. But you can see what's happened to our element. Our element has stretched. It is essentially spanning the columns based on the start and end instructions that you gave it. Now I'm going to select my other box over here, and we're going to do the exact same thing, except this time we're going to play with rows. So I am going to choose for this to actually start on row 2. Okay, and then I want it to end on row 5. And now this particular object is going to span across rows. Now, can you span across columns and rows? Well, let's see. We can start in column 2. We can end in column 5. And now, yes, I have spanned across rows with this element. I have spanned across columns with this element, all at the exact same time. I have tremendous control over how big objects are, how many columns they span, how many rows they span, whether they're stretching or not stretching, and so on and so forth. And so the more you practice with grid, the more you understand about grid, the more you're going to be able to manipulate your layouts using these types of controls. Now, I will say the need for this is very rare, but this kind of manipulation. But if you do need it, it's really, really helpful to have. It's really, really helpful to have. And Automatic CSS is not going to let you down. We have pretty much anything that you would need to do, including overlapping elements in a grid. Pretty much anything you would need to do a CSS grid, you are able to do with utility classes, okay? All right, so I'm going to clear the utility classes there, and let's clear the utility classes here. We're back to where we started. So now I want to talk about combining a start with a span, right? We did start and end, and if you do a start and an end with a big gap, it's going to span that amount, but there's also just something called span. And span can actually be much more helpful and more easy to understand because you don't have to choose an explicit end. Like for example, let's say I started in column 3 and then I wanted to span 3 columns, right? I don't want to have to calculate like, okay, how many columns are there and what column would it be at if it spanned 3? I just want it to span 3 from wherever it started, okay? So I can do that by coming up here and typing the word span and choosing 3. And now I don't have to measure out the end or the number of columns. And if the columns change, then I have to come back and change the ending instruction. No, you don't have to worry about any of that. You choose a start, and then you say, just span, right? I can also, and by the way, if I click the button again, it's going to remove the class. So I don't have to go back to the classes area and remove. I can add, I can remove, all from the context menu. So that's very nice to know. You can hit all here. Now look what happens when I hit all though, because I am saying, hey, you've got to span all columns. It can't because there's a block in the way. And so what it naturally did is it brought that to the next line. So if you wanted it to go from here to the end, you would need to actually know what the end is. And you can do that with, you would have to actually count out the columns in your head. Now, keep in mind, let's go back to the end because I just thought of one more thing that you need to know. If we are going to do the ends, right? So remember, this is a 6-column grid. Look, if I say call end 6, it doesn't actually go to the end. This is a very common thing that beginners get confused about. So if you're counting columns, right? Column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 is counted at the start of 6. So the end of column 6 is actually the start of column 7. So if I wanted this to go to all the way the end of a 6-column grid, I need to say it needs to end on 7 because that's ending on the start of 7. The end of 6 is the start of 7. That gets me the full way. That is one thing that confuses beginners relentlessly, or should I say, to no end. There's my dad joke for this episode. Okay, so I'm gonna cancel this out. We've got all of our starts, all of our ends, all of our spans. We can order things, okay? If we right click, we hit order. We could say, you know what, order this first. We can come in here. We could say order this last. Now, nothing is moving. Why? Because we've kind of frozen things into specific positions in this grid. But if I start getting less selective with saying, no, 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 you are in this position. Like you have to start in column 3 or whatever. Notice that order first, and I don't even need an order last on here. Just this order first is going to make it come before the other block because the other block doesn't have an order property on it, right? If I remove order first, bang, they're going to flip flop, right? I could take this red one and I could say the bright one, the bright red one, and I could say order last and it's going to go to the end. Last thing before we get into an actual practical example of this, if I type the word self, remember that the actual box was not the size of the cell. That means there's actually some free roaming room in every cell. So if I type in self, I can actually come down here and I can say start or center or end. And it will actually remove the stretch on that element. Remember, the element is stretching. It'll remove the stretch and replace that with a center or end or start, which allows me to actually align things within individual cells in the grid. I know, if you don't know anything about grid, this is very, very overwhelming stuff. Automatic CSS gives you the tools to quickly manipulate grids, but you do still have to understand a little bit about CSS Grid, which is why I have other educational videos on this topic. This one is just to show you what automatic CSS is capable of when using grids and how to use grids in a practical workflow, which reminds me, we need to get to the practical workflow part. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to remove our playground. We are starting nice and fresh from scratch. I'm gonna go up here and I'm gonna choose a simple layout like Hero Victor. And if we take a look at Hero Victor, we can see we have what appears to be a 2-column layout and then 3 columns with cards in them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and add a new section, and we are going to rebuild Hero Victor, and we are going to rebuild this 2 different ways. I'm going to show you a utility class approach to doing this, and I'm going to show you the variable and custom class BEM approach to doing this. And if you're ever, again, wondering, do I use utility? Do I use BEM? You either clearly know what you want to do because you have the experience to know, or you don't know. And if you don't know, there is a saying for that. When in doubt, BEM it out. When in doubt, BEM it out. If you don't know, the safest route is to BEM it out, okay? So that answers your question right there. If you don't already know, then you're in doubt. And when you're in doubt, you should BEM it out, okay? All right, so here's what we're gonna do. 2 columns for this first container right here. Let me go ahead and add a BG color to this real quick. Let's do BG Ultra Light. That way we can see a distinction between the pre-made hero and the hero that we are currently working on. Okay, so I am going to, first of all, I'm going to duplicate that container because I need 2 rows down here. And this actually brings us to our first really good point. This is going to be 2 separate grids, okay? We don't want to use the same grid because they're different topics of content, right? We've got intro and media, and then we've got selling points. Selling points, that's a kind of a different subtopic than our intro and our media. So we're not going to try to put all this in the same grid. There could be scenarios where you want to put things in a grid and manipulate how big they are, and we'll cover that. We'll do a little blog post example where we cover that. But this is a scenario where you actually want 2 separate grids. So with utility classes, this is super easy to do. I'm going to select this right here, and I'm going to right-click, type grid, and I'm going to come down here and select 2. And now you can see with the visualizer, I have 2 columns side by side, which means if I put blocks in here, block, those 2 blocks are going to be side by side, making it very easy for me to put a heading and text over here, and very easy for me to put an image on this side. I will just grab an image. We'll use our Nike shoe and drop that in. Fantastic. We'll make sure that this is a paragraph, and we'll add a button in there as well. And the button did not actually go in the cell that I wanted it to go into, so I'm going to drag it into there. Okay. Now, just quick refresher, pop quiz. How do we style a button, guys? We right click, we hit button, and we choose button primary. And now we have a primary colored button. Look how easy that was. Okay. Notice that the gap is much different. And this text actually right here is much larger. How do we handle this? Well, the larger text is very easy. Right click this text and we're going to choose L for our text size. And that's going to use the utility class text L to make that large text. If I copied all of this content right here, I did not want to underline that. And I bring that down here and just paste it in, we're going to get the exact same content. I can do the same thing with our heading, pop that in and paste. This also needs to be an H1. And so now the only difference, as you see, is the width is different here, or the gap is bigger. It's hard to see which without inspecting. But that brings up a really good point. If you need a gap that large, I would not change the gap property, okay? What I would tend to do is take that wrapper of that content, right click, width, and we're gonna use a utility class, maybe like width M, and that is gonna give us a contained width for that content without having to manipulate the gap in my grid or anything like that. Now I'm also looking here and I'm seeing that this box is not the same height as the shoe that's over there on the right-hand side. And is that a problem? No, not necessarily, but it does change how we're going to vertically center this content. One thing I can do when they're not the same size is, because we're not stretching them, remember the thing that makes them the same size is that stretch class, okay? Watch this. If I put stretch on here, just type stretch, put it on there. Now both containers, look, that container of content is the same height as the shoe. Isn't that great? Now, what if I don't want that? I can come in, there's actually multiple ways that I can center this content. Remember the thing called self, okay? I could do self-center. And if I do self-center, it's gonna be vertically centered. Now, that's not the only way to do it. I could take off self-center. I could come to the container. I know this is a fire hose, an absolute fire hose, but we're demonstrating the power of utility classes in automatic CSS. This is not a Flexbox education video. This is not a grid education videos. Those are linked down below, okay? I can come up here and do an align items to the center, and I'm gonna get vertically centered content all the same. The last thing that I could do is I could take that off. I could bring my stretch class back. I do want my oh, that was a typo. Let's go ahead and delete that. We don't want that to happen. And we don't want, oh, it actually created two classes. Look at that. We're going a little fast for our fingers here. Okay, so let's slow it down. Let's type stretch and apply that. So now we have two containers side by side that are the same height, which means inside of this container, I can actually come in and justify my content to the center. And now I get vertically centered text. As you see, there's many different approaches. There's many different avenues to get you to where you want to go. And automatic CSS empowers you in every single workflow, every single avenue and aspect. Automatic CSS is able to get the job done. Now I'm going to come down here. We are going to handle the 3 cards, okay? I'm not actually going to make the 3 cards. We're just going to visualize it. I'm going to right click grid and choose 3. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a block. We are going to drop in a heading and text, and that is our first card. Duplicate, duplicate. We have, my friends, a 3-column layout. A 3-column layout sitting right below our 2-column layout. Now, none of these are responsive. If I go down here to these breakpoints, you're going to see up top, hey, all this responds accordingly. But down here, it's all just going to squish together because I told this layout to be 2 columns and I told this layout to be 3 columns. And I didn't give it any other instructions. No other instructions were given, so that's just what those things are going to be. So now what we have to do is talk about utility classes that affect specific breakpoints, right? You see these breakpoints up here? This big one is XL. This is L. This is M. This is S. If I open the automatic CSS dashboard and I go to layout, breakpoints, you're going to see I'm able to set values for all of these breakpoints right here. And then I need to match those breakpoints in bricks, which they should match by default. And if you make changes, then you need to make changes in bricks to match, okay? But you see XL, L, M, S, they're all labeled right here. It's just t-shirt sizes. That's all it is. Very easy to remember. Okay, so now let's talk about this. The cool thing is, If I was styling at the ID level, I would set a 2-column grid at the ID level. Then I would have to travel to this breakpoint called M, where I want to change this to a 1-column grid, right? And I would have to put a new instruction in here at this breakpoint while I'm previewing that breakpoint. But with utility classes don't care where you are in the builder when you add them. What breakpoint are you looking at when you add the class? Classes don't care. Classes are predefined in their instruction set. They're not added at a specific breakpoint, okay? So you can actually add them anywhere, which, watch this. If I go back, let's say I just know from experience, okay? I removed the grid. From experience, I know I want this to be a 2-column grid on desktop, and at the end breakpoint, I want it to break to 1 column. Let me show you exactly how easy that is. So I'm gonna right-click grid, and I'm gonna say 2. But then I'm gonna come over to 1, and I'm gonna hit the command button on my keyboard, and it's gonna pull up my breakpoints. And I can choose the M breakpoint at the 1 column, right? Because I want 1 column at M. That's essentially what I'm doing right here. I'm going to 1 column. Where do you want 1 column? At M. And so I've applied grid 2, grid M1. Actually, the context menu did this for me. Grid 2, grid M1. Now, without explanation, without stopping to explain, in my workflow, in my speediness, because as you practice, you get better and faster, this is how quick you can work. So you do grid, you go 2, command, M, bang, and now I have grid 2, grid M1, which means I have a responsive grid. Look at this. So right here, I've got my 2 columns, that's desktop. Let's go to here. This is the L breakpoint, still 2 columns. Let's go to the M breakpoint, 1 column. Let's go to the S breakpoint, 1 column. So I did a fully responsive grid like bang, bang, you know? Bang, bang, okay? All right, so that was just the entertainment value. It's a free video, what can I say, okay? You didn't pay extra for entertainment. Bang, that's what you get when it's a free video. Okay, so we're gonna take off the grid 3. Watch how fast I can work. Let's say I wanted to make 2 changes. I wanted to make it 3 column on desktop, 2 columns at L, 1 column at M. Watch the speed, grid, okay? 3, 2, L, 1, M. Say, so grid 3, grid L2, grid M1. Let's look at what happened. So grid 3, I have it. Let's go to L. Oh, look, it's a 2-column grid now. Let's go to M. Oh, it's a 1-column grid now. So I'm able to use these utility classes hyper quickly to do exactly what I want. Now, if you're not Speedy Gonzalez, if you're not bang bang, okay, you might need to go preview and say, okay, at L, I think we're good. I want to go to M. Oh, this is where we need to break it to 1. If that's the case, you can do it right here. You don't have to go back to desktop. Remember, you can add the utility class from anywhere. So I'm gonna go grid. I want it to be 1 column, right? Right here. I'm gonna hover and make sure I choose the breakpoint I'm at. Grid M1 is gonna get added, and that's what's gonna make it 1 column at M. You don't want to come in and be looking at this breakpoint and just choose 1, because what you're doing is you're putting a 1 on top of a 3. These are desktop classes, okay? You're not specifying a breakpoint with that class. You have 2 conflicting instructions right now, okay? What I want to do is go hit command on your keyboard and choose the M version of 1, which is going to put the M before the 1, which means that at M, that's where it's going to 1. It's not just an overall. See, this doesn't have a breakpoint in it, which means it affects all breakpoints. This one only affects M and below, okay? So that's the one caveat. You just need to know how classes work, and then you need to know when you're applying those classes, how to apply them appropriately, and how to use our context menu flyout, right? Where we have, all right, grid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but if I hold command, it'll actually fly out and give me breakpoint controls for all of these utility classes. Okay, we need to move on. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna add a new section right below here. And again, I'm gonna duplicate, and we're gonna do this again, except now I'm in doubt. Should I use utility classes? Should I use BIM? Well, anytime I'm in doubt, I should BIM it out, right? Okay, because you can't go wrong with BIM. So this is a hero section, okay? We're gonna call this main hero right here. And then I'm gonna say that this is gonna be this is the inner content, okay, of my main hero. So I'm gonna add, and what I do now is I do all my HTML elements that I need first, because I wanna be able to auto BIM this situation. And in order to auto BIM everything needs to exist on the canvas, okay? So I'm gonna add my heading, I'm gonna add my text, a very different workflow, but it has unique advantages, okay? I'm gonna come over here. We already talked about what those are in the last video. Watch my video on BIM. Okay, I'm gonna choose our media right here. I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna put a block in. That block is gonna be my card. We're gonna go heading and we're gonna go text. This is how pros work, by the way, okay? This is what you wanna build up to. Now, the next thing I'm gonna do, I can choose to organize my structure panel right here if that's easiest for you, or I can just go in and auto BIM, and I can use auto BIM to do the organization of the structure panel while I'm creating all the classes. Here's what that looks like. I just go ahead and hit auto BIM right here, and we'll pull this to the center of the screen. This is not just a generic section. This is my main hero. This first container, I'm gonna call my inner. That first block, I'm gonna say, is my content wrapper. I have my heading, I have my, we can call this a lead. I like to call this a lead paragraph, like in journalism. Button is fine. This next block over here is actually my media wrapper, and inside of that is my media, and then down here is that other row of columns, the cards. But we have to talk about this because those are not actually part of the hero. If you refer back to BIM, that's their own thing. Like, those feature cards could be used anywhere. The fact that I'm using them in a hero right now is of no consequence. I want those to actually be their own separate BIMable little block. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tell Auto BIM, you know what? I want you to ignore those. So I'm gonna hit the little X and they're gonna go dark, which means that they are not going to be affected by Auto BIM. Okay, so now I have main hero, inner, content wrapper, heading, lead, button, media wrapper. Sync the labels, please. Apply classes, my structure panel. Let me shrink this up here. Okay, so you can see where we go in that's our utility class version. Here we go. Main hero, inner, content wrapper, media, heading, lead, button, and then it left the containers alone down here. They don't have classes. The other things all have classes. Auto BIM is magic. Okay, it's absolute magic. Now, I come down here and remember, I want to auto BIM this separately. What are we going to call this? Feature grid, or I'll call it main feature grid, like this, okay? But, pause. Is the grid itself, is this whole situation what we want to BIM? No, because the grid does not have any element children in it. The grid only has other blocks because the card is a standalone element on its own. I should be able to use a feature card wherever I want to use a feature card. It shouldn't have to live in the main feature grid, okay? Right? So we actually want to back out of this. We want to come down to this block. That's the card. That's the card. And we want to hit BIM on the block. And we're going to call this main feature card, like this. You can call them whatever you want, whatever makes sense to you, right? Main feature card heading, main feature card text, sync labels, apply. I just made a main feature card. This is my main feature grid. It is a standalone element. I'm just going to come up here and say main feature grid, just like that. Now, I have BIMmed my whole situation right here. This actually goes a lot faster when you don't have to talk and explain, okay? All right, so now what we're going to do is start styling. So I'm going to take this inner right here, and I'm going to use the builder controls. The advantage of BIM, one of the advantages of BIM, is that you get to use the builder that you bought and you paid for, right? Where utility classes do everything for you, BIM, you get to use the builder. So we're going to say, display this as a grid. And then for grid template columns, now, do I have to know how to write grid instructions? No. Automatic CSS, still going to do all the work for you here. Right click, it's all right click, baby. Okay, you just hit right click all the time. It's when in doubt, right click. When in doubt, BIM it out. When in doubt, right click. Okay, so right click, and it's going to know, oh, you're in a grid input. Let me go ahead and give you the grid options. So we're going to say that that's a grid 2 right there. Now, how do we get this centered? Now, bricks actually stretches the content for us when we do this, but I'm going to go ahead and choose the content wrapper. I'm going to recognize, got a big box here, which means I can use flex to just center everything down to the middle. Okay. We don't want to center it vertically, or I'm sorry, horizontally. We just want to center it vertically. So that's aligned to the main axis. And then I want my width constraint on here. Remember, I used width M up here. Well, I can use width M right here. How do I do that? Right click and choose M. It knows it's a width input. You're just going to choose width M and you are good to go. So if this was a heading, right, a heading 1, and we actually had our content in place properly, this would all look exactly the same. So let's bring this in, bang. And then how do we do our button situation here? Do we need main hero button? No. It's one of those insurance classes. Go watch my video on BEM. It's an insurance class. What I come up here and do is type in button, and I still use the utility class button primary. So now I've got my little 2-column grid, okay? Let's come down here and talk about our cards. I'm gonna choose the main feature grid, flex grid, right click, 3, fantastic, duplicate, duplicate, my gosh. We're done. It's like magic. Now, let's talk about the responsiveness of all of this situation, right? Because if I come down here, ain't gonna be responsive out of the box, right? We got to make decisions. And when you're using BIM, you do make the decisions at the breakpoints, and you do add the instructions at the breakpoints. So right here, I want this to be a 1-column grid. All I'm going to do is right click, choose 1. That's it. There's no command. There's no choosing breakpoints. I'm putting an instruction in an input at this breakpoint. It's only going to apply at that breakpoint and below. Then I'm going to come down here. I'm going to choose my 3-column grid, main feature grid, right click, 1 column, responsiveness, bang, done. Okay. Super, super, super easy. Get rid of all of this. One more scenario that we need to walk through, okay? We're going to come in here. We're going to see if we can get a little blog post thing going on. Let's see what we have available for blog, or maybe it's called article, okay? Wait, maybe an article card. Let's do article card Juliet. Look at this article card Juliet. Let's pop it into this container right here. Fantastic. And it's already trying to loop itself all over the place. This is really, really, really nice, okay? All right. So most situations with cards, okay, you're going to be dealing with loops if you're building the website the right way. There is no, there's no way around this. You have to know and understand not automatic CSS, CSS, okay? So again, take Page Building 101. I teach all this stuff in Page Building 101. But if you're not gonna loop it, okay, let's turn off the loop for a second, and let's put a couple more cards in here. Let's use utility classes and just demonstrate something real quick. Let's go article card Juliet and put a background color on here. So again, right click, I'm gonna choose BG light. I'm gonna make it ugly. It's gonna be nice and ugly, but you're gonna be able to see it and make sense of it really well. I'm gonna come in here, and actually we don't want more cards until we have an image. Let's get an image of some sort in here. So select image, let's put our shoe in there. Fantastic, great. So we've got a shoe. Let's grab this right here and let's go BG light on there as well. Fantastic. Now it looks all nice and cohesive. Now let's go ahead and duplicate, bang, bang. Let's say I want most of these side by side, but I want the first one to be like a featured card. And so I want it to span across more columns. Well, the first thing we need is more columns. So I'm going to hit grid and I'm going to choose 2. Okay, so it's going to put all these cards side by side. But now I'm going to take that first card and I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say, you know what? I want you, and if I'm using utility classes to do this, I'm just going to type span and say 2. And look what I get, my friends. I just get a featured card up there. The first one is spanning across. You can do whatever you want with these grids. It's very, very, very easy. But again, this is not how I would approach it, because even though automatic CSS is capable of this, it's not scalable, maintainable. Scalable, maintainable way to do this is with a loop. The problem is when you loop, okay, let's go ahead and turn that loop back on. So loop it, and it's going to create more instances. There's only one selectable element, which means I can't just put utility classes on it. Look, whatever utility class I put on it is going to apply to every instance of the thing. And that's not actually what I want to do. So utility classes, when you're using a loop, are off the table, right? You have to go to either the builder controls or custom CSS. Now, with the builder controls, how do you just select the first element and tell it to do something? There really is no builder control for that, right? So what you would want is in this case, and this is a little bit out of control, this headline. Let's just make it like an H3, okay? Or maybe an H4. Maybe it already is. Oh, you know what? Brix's canvas is not keeping up with us. Let's see if we can update our canvas situation and see what is going on. Let's refresh the builder. Okay, why is this not H3, typography H4, H5, H4? It does not seem to care. Oh, somebody styled it at the ID level. That's not what you want to do. That's why you don't style things at the ID level, okay? Let's go H4, now update, and then let's refresh the canvas. There we go. Okay, and we actually want it to be an H3. All right, great. See, don't style things at the ID level. It causes tremendous problems and headaches. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're just gonna talk about programmatic styling. I'm gonna say blog post grid, right? And then on this grid, I'm going to come down to CSS and I'm going to do root. And what I essentially want to do is I want to choose the first direct child. Okay. So the way you do this is the universal selector will select anything. This says it's the first direct anything. And then we attach the first child pseudo class to it. And we end up selecting the first child. Now I'm going to copy that because before we do that, we actually need to put a grid on here. So we're going to say display grid, right click, 2 columns, style, CSS, grab the first child. And what do we want to do to the first child? Well, we want to do grid column span 2. And now it's going to span 2 programmatically. And actually now when I add new blog posts, right? The first one is always going to be like if I use the utility class on a random blog post, yeah, if you put more in there, you're gonna have to move that stupid utility class around. You don't want to do that. This is programmatic. This is like, I don't care which child it is. If it's in the first position, it's getting spanned 2, okay? And so this is why the builder doesn't empower you to do this. Automatic CSS has utility classes, but utility classes are not the scalable, maintainable, programmatic approach for accomplishing this scenario. So you have to do a workaround. This is where you actually have to know what you're doing as the web designer. Very, very important. That's why Page Building 101 exists, to educate you and empower you in that regard. But again, I'm using Automatic CSS utility variable to make the grid, right? I just have to go a step further with my own skill and programmatically select something and span it and things like that. Okay, let me go back to camera. I understand that that was a fire hose. I understand that we just covered a lot. I understand that Automatic CSS in this regard is a very extensive and powerful framework with a learning curve. And that's why you need to create the little playground that I created in the beginning, play around with it a little bit, watch the videos down below, make sure you understand grid, make sure you understand Flexbox, right? And then you will be empowered to actually do your job, because you're going to run into different scenarios where you have to know what the pros are of every approach, what the cons are of each approach, and be able to choose the correct approach based on the scenario that you are faced with at the current time. And on a different page, it's going to be a different scenario. On a different page, it's going to be a different scenario. And you're going to have to know the best approach for those scenarios. Okay? But I think this is a good primer for traditional grids in Automatic CSS. This is a series of videos where we're going to explore many different layout tools and options. I will see you again in the next video. Peace.